Imagine trusting someone every day, someone who shapes your future. And then, in an instant, they decide your life doesn't matter. That's exactly what happened to Nohema Graber. Her own student, only 16 years old, planned her death with chilling precision. A plan hidden in notes, searches, and dark jokes that no one took seriously until it was too late. There are moments when a story doesn't ease its way in. It drops you straight into the darkness, as if the truth has been waiting in the cold, ready to be heard. If stories like this one shake you, if you want more real cases told with honesty, detail, and respect, then do me one favor, hit subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it makes sure you never miss the truth behind cases people try to forget. That's how this case begins. Not with a warning, not with a gentle lead-in, but with a quiet park where the last steps of a beloved teacher echoed long after she was gone. Chautauqua Park, a place where early evenings usually carried the sounds of rustling leaves and soft footsteps, became the backdrop for a plan that had been brewing in the mind of a 16-year-old boy who believed his future was slipping out of his grasp. At an age where most teenagers stress over homework and weekend plans, Willard Miller was writing something entirely different. A procedure, coldly named, hidden in the notes of his phone. Words like stun, move off trail, empty compartments, and secure victory, sitting there like instructions for a mission no one imagined someone his age could even conceive. But he had, and for days, even weeks, those closest to him heard the strange, unsettling jokes he made. Dark jokes, they called them in court. Things teenagers shouldn't say. Things no one thought he would actually do. But that's the thing about real danger, it doesn't always reveal itself with fire or rage. Sometimes it hides behind a quiet face, a calm voice, a kid who says he's just frustrated about a grade. A grade. Just one grade he believed would ruin everything he had planned. Studying abroad, a different life, a future that suddenly felt fragile. He convinced himself that the woman who had dedicated her life to teaching, Nohema Graber, someone known for her warmth, her patience, her steady kindness, had become the obstacle standing in his way. And in that twisted belief, something inside him shifted. Something irreversible. The night she went out for her walk, the sky fading into a soft blue haze, she didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know two teenagers were waiting along her regular path. The one she trusted. The one she walked every single day without fear. The park was quiet, the trails empty, and every detail of that moment would later be dissected in a courtroom, where the truth unfolded piece by piece. The planning, the ambush, the final silence after the attack. But before any of that was revealed, before anyone realized she was missing, the woods carried only one undeniable truth. Someone who should have been too young to imagine evil had already stepped into it without hesitation. When investigators arrived at the park after reports that Mrs. Graber had not returned home, the scene told a story before any witness could speak. A tarp stretched over something unnaturally still. A wheelbarrow placed deliberately, almost carefully, as if covering reality could erase responsibility. And beneath it all, the heartbreaking confirmation that the beloved teacher everyone was searching for had been brutally beaten and hidden, as though her life had been nothing more than a problem someone wanted to get rid of. But the truth never stays buried. It clings to objects, to footprints, to digital traces left behind by those who think they're smarter than the system. Miller and his friend, Jeremy Goodale, had wiped tools, cleaned surfaces, tried to erase the chaos their hands created. But wiping away blood doesn't erase intent. And it certainly doesn't remove evidence. Police were already pulling together the pieces. The Google searches made on Miller's phone days earlier, searches that were impossible to explain away. Questions like, what happens if your teacher dies in the middle of the course? Typed in not once, but multiple times. And in his notes, the chilling procedure that prosecutors would later read aloud in court, each word slicing through the room like a reminder that this wasn't a sudden wave of rage. This was planned. When detectives brought Miller in for questioning, he sat there like every teenager's worst version of fear and denial tangled together. His voice shifted with each new theory he came up with, as though he was trying to find the one lie that would save him. First, he denied being anywhere near the park. Then he changed his story, then changed it again. At one point, He even claimed a group of masked kids forced him to help move the body. A story that crumbled the moment investigators questioned him further. A 16-year-old doesn't usually look into the eyes of trained detectives and attempt to craft fantasy out of murder. But he did. He tried again and again, reaching for any explanation that didn't involve admitting what he had done. And yet, behind every half-formed lie, every nervous adjustment of his voice, the truth hovered. He knew it. Investigators knew it. And eventually, there was no story left except the one he couldn't escape. There is a moment in every investigation when the mask slips, when the contradictions become too heavy to carry, and the person hiding behind them begins to fold. For Miller, that moment came not with a full confession, but with something quieter, something almost accidental. He finally admitted he had been in the park. He admitted he brought items used in the attack. He admitted he helped hide her body. But even then, even with the truth knocking at the walls he built, he refused to acknowledge the blow that ended her life. He distanced himself from the brutality as if that small separation could reduce his responsibility, as if he could draw a line between planning a murder and committing it. Meanwhile, investigators continued digging into the digital trail he left behind. They found timestamps, notes, messages, every detail that prosecutors would later use to paint a portrait of a teenager who did not act in a moment of panic, but in a chilling state of intent. Friends came forward, voices trembling as they recalled the jokes he made, jokes they never took seriously because who would? They were just kids. Or so they thought. Each testimony felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place, forming a picture no one wanted to see but everyone needed to confront. That as the case moved forward, the weight of what happened spread far beyond the investigation room. The community felt shattered. A place used to quiet routines and familiar faces suddenly thrust into national headlines. People whispered about motive, about how a single grade could twist into something so monstrous. Parents held their children closer. Students stared at empty desks where lectures once began with a warm smile. Grief became a presence in every hallway. All while Miller sat in detention, writing things no one expected. A note was intercepted, one that didn't mention regret, or sorrow, or guilt. Instead, it listed the name, schedule, and parking details of a witness the prosecution would rely on. A detail so deliberate that when the judge later spoke about it, he called the discovery deeply troubling. Because remorse doesn't look like surveillance. It doesn't look like strategy. It certainly doesn't look like keeping track of people whose only role was telling the truth. And so the image of the teenager who acted out of fear or impulsivity crumbled even more, replaced by a version of him that was harder to understand and far more chilling. Courtrooms have a way of exposing what people hide. The fluorescent lights, the stillness, the silence broken only by voices that echo every detail of a life lost and a crime committed. When the trial began, eyes were fixed on the boy who sat at the defense table. Quiet, hands folded, face expressionless. But the courtroom wasn't interested in the calm he displayed in that moment. It was interested in everything that led to the night Mrs. Graber never came home. Prosecutors laid out the evidence slowly, carefully, piece by piece. They read the notes from his phone, letting each disturbing phrase cut through the air. Finalize the win. Load cargo. Secure victory. Words that sounded like someone preparing not for school, not for life, but for conquest. The room felt colder as they spoke. Some jurors glanced at the boy, searching for any reaction. A blink, a tremble, something. But there was nothing. Witnesses took the stand. Friends who once laughed with him now sat under oath, recounting the dark humor they brushed off. Detectives recounted the shifting lies he told. Analysts described the searches made on his phone. And each testimony tightened the circle around him. The defense attempted to refocus the narrative, painting him as overwhelmed, inexperienced, influenced by fear. But every attempt ran into the same brick wall. His own actions. Then came the victim impact statements. Voices trembling, breaking, holding back tears as they spoke of a woman whose kindness was a thread woven through their family's memories. A woman who left behind a husband, children, and a community that still struggled to speak her name without feeling the weight of loss. The judge listened. The audience listened. But Miller, the court later said he offered little remorse. His apology, when he stood to give it, felt thin, distant, more reflective of the trial he endured than the life he took. Judge Sean Showers leaned forward as he delivered his words, voice steady and sharp with conviction. He spoke of the planning, the deception, the lack of genuine remorse. And then he said the sentence that echoed through the courtroom, "Evil is not limited by age." His tone made it clear, if the law allowed him to sentence a juvenile to life without parole, he would have considered it. But laws draw lines, and even so, he imposed the maximum allowed. The moment the sentence was read, the room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp, simply froze, like everyone needed a second to process the weight of what had been decided. For Miller, the years stretched out before him. Decades in a cell, decades to relive the choice he made at 16. For the Graber family, no number could balance what they lost. No sentence could return the voice, the smile, the gentle presence taken from them. Yet the haunting part wasn't the length of the sentence. It was the silence that followed. The subtle shift in the room as people rose from their seats. Conversations whispered behind hands. Tears wiped quietly. Even as he was led away, Miller kept that same stillness he carried through the trial, as if he were walking through the final chapter of a story he never fully acknowledged he created. But stories like this don't end in court. They linger in every place touched by the aftermath. In the park where Mrs. Graber once walked. In the classroom where students kept expecting her to walk through the door. In the town that now speaks of safety with a new kind of fragility. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing that tragedy doesn't always come from strangers or distant dangers. Sometimes it grows unnoticed, building quietly in the life of someone who seems ordinary. And yet the most painful part is how preventable it all feels in hindsight. A frustrated teenager, a graded assignment, stress that could have been resolved with conversation, support, or time. But he chose the darkest possible path, and the consequences became irreversible. Those close to him spoke about how he never seemed outwardly violent, how he hid behind humor and normalcy. That's what makes cases like this so disturbing. The thin line between the face someone shows and the thoughts they keep hidden as the prison doors close behind him. The world moves on, but the shadows of that night do not. They remain etched in conversations, in legal records, and in the hearts of those who live with the reality that a moment of twisted intention changed everything. It's the kind of story that forces people to question not just how it happened, but how deeply human emotions can warp when mixed with fear, pride, and desperation. Time will continue to pass. Seasons will change. The classroom once filled with Mrs. Graber's lessons will welcome new teachers, new students, new memories. But the story of what happened will never fade completely, because some tragedies carve themselves into a community forever. People will always remember where they were when they heard the news. Students will carry the weight of having lost someone who believed in them. Families will remember the shock, the grief, the disbelief that something so violent could happen in such a familiar place. Inside the prison walls, Miller will age, but the past won't loosen its grip. He will wake up each morning under the same fluorescent lights, behind the same metal door, with years stretching out endlessly ahead. And somewhere in that long stretch of time, he may finally confront the truth he spent so long avoiding. Not just the horror of the crime, but the twisted belief that led him there. When the judge said he would have considered life without parole, it wasn't out of anger. It was because the crime carried a level of calculation that shook even those accustomed to seeing the worst of humanity. Sinister and evil, he had called the actions. Words not used lightly. Words that would follow Miller long after sentencing day. But beyond the courtroom language and legal statements lies the heart of the story. The loss of a woman whose life meant something. A teacher who cared. A mother, a wife, a friend. Someone who walked her daily path without imagining the danger hidden in the shadows. This script doesn't end with redemption because real life doesn't tie itself into neat endings. Some stories simply hold their weight, leaving viewers with a reminder of how fragile everything can be. And in that sense, this case becomes more than a crime. It becomes a lesson about the quiet warning signs we miss, the unseen storms beneath calm surfaces, and the unimaginable decisions that can grow from fear and frustration. A narrative that lingers not because of its shock value, but because it exposes a truth we rarely admit. Even at 16, choices can carry darkness deeper than anyone expects, and consequences that last far beyond a single moment in time. Some stories stay with you long after the final sentence is read, not because they are sensational, but because they reveal how fragile the world can be. This one is heavy, not because of the crime alone, but because of everything it destroyed. A family lost its anchor. Students lost a mentor. A community lost its sense of safety. And in the center of it all stood a teenager who convinced himself that the only way to fix his future was to take someone else's away. That choice didn't just silence a life. It shattered countless others. Years from now, when his sentence becomes nothing more than numbers on a page, the impact of what he did will still ripple silently through Fairfield. People will still walk the same paths Nohema once did, remembering the kindness she carried into every classroom, every conversation, every moment. Her legacy will live longer than the darkness that tried to erase it. And maybe that's what this story truly shows us, that even in the worst acts, the weight of loss reminds us who the real light was. Nohema Graber's life mattered. Her work mattered. Her presence mattered. And nothing, not a sentence, not a trial, not the cold planning behind her death, can take that away. That in the end, justice can only do so much. It punishes the crime, but it cannot heal the wound. That part is left to those who remember her, those who continue her spirit, and those who refuse to let the cruelty of one night overshadow the warmth she gave the world for so many years. And as the doors close on this case, what remains is a truth we cannot ignore. One choice, one moment of darkness, can echo for a lifetime. But so can the memory of a life lived with heart, compassion, and purpose. And it is that memory, not the crime, that deserves to be carried forward. If you're still here, thank you for listening. These stories aren't easy to tell, and they're even harder to relive. If you want to help keep real cases alive and support this kind of careful, respectful storytelling, make sure to subscribe before you go. Your support truly means everything.